Om Timirandasya Gyanam Jana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Mano Vishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Padamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuttapada Kamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajadam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakha Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sudadevi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Hare Krishna. So we'll try to explain something about Prabhupada's Russian mission. Its initial stages, gradual development, and present state of affairs. But to understand better the situation in Russia and how the preaching evolved and what was Russia or Soviet Union at that time when Srila Prabhupada arrived in 1971. By the way, this year it will be 40th anniversary of his arrival to Russia. 50th anniversary of his arrival to Russia. So it's very appropriate to speak this year about this. But before, for you to understand, I will a little bit touch Russian history because some of you may not know the historical circumstances. You probably know that in 1917, in the beginning of the 20th century, in Russia, there was a communist revolution. And at that time, communists took the power over whole Russian country, and it was a very difficult transition because communists wanted to do everything from scratch. They basically eradicated the previous culture, and an essential part of any culture in any country is religion. Russia was for 3 centuries before, Russia was a Christian country. And there was quite a few Christian saints. It was a very religious country for some time. But by the time of communist revolution, of course, religion was in decline. People were somewhat disillusioned in religion. And communists took advantage of it, and they actually purposefully wanted to completely erase religion from the memory of people. Lenin was the leader of communists who took over Russia, and Lenin, he was devout atheist, and he said that, we will make all the people atheists here. Everyone. And his successor, Stalin, a very cruel dictator, he actually said that by 1930, there will be not a single believer in the whole of Russia, in the whole of Soviet Union. Not a single believer. So there was a very intense propaganda. They kind of gave up on old people. They said, these old people anyway, they will die soon. But young people, they shouldn't believe in God. They should not have this idea of God. I remember very well, I was born in 1956, and from my kindergarten, from very early age, I was told there is no God. The brainwashing started with the children when they were 4 or 3 years old. And it was an official, very strongly imposed doctrine. There is no God. And there was a proof. You perhaps know that the first spaceship was arranged by the Soviet Union. Gagarin went into space. And very strong proof of the atheist was there that Gagarin went to cosmos, to the space, and he didn't see God. So therefore, he's not there. As if he was supposed to hang there and wait for Gagarin to come. Anyway, so that was the story. So what happened next? Actually, because people need to believe in something, so they made Lenin as some kind of pseudo-god. They put his body in samadhi. There was the whole institution, probably around 1,000 people working so that his body would not deteriorate. They put him in a glass coffin, and people would come and worship him. And, the slogan in the Soviet Union was that Lenin is eternal. He's still living. He's there in the coffin, don't worry, he's there. And they were doing everything possible to make an impression that he's eternal. They were putting all kinds of cosmetics on him, on his dead body, The dead body was deteriorating anyway, but they were trying. So there was, anyway, they wanted to eradicate religion, but at the same time they introduced pseudo-religion with pseudo-God, who is in the tomb there in the Kremlin, and people, I remember still in my childhood, and when Prabhupada actually went to Russia, it was still very much of a custom. People would stand in a queue for 3, 4, 5 hours just for 1 second of darshan of Lenin in the tomb. So religious they were. They went to Lenin's samadhi, so-called samadhi. Just for 1 second of darshan, they were ready to spend 4, sometimes 5 hours in a very cold weather, freezing cold, going into this tomb. And they were only allowed to be there for 1, 2, 3 seconds to see, eternal Lenin is here. You know? So this is how crazy people can become. They invent some God. Srila Prabhupada always jokes in this, you know. They kind of appoint a God, you know. Ramakrishna is God, or whoever is God, you know, Lenin is God. So, and then start worshipping, and of course, the end result is frustration. So what happened during Stalin, the successor of Lenin, he didn't achieve the goal. By 1930, still there were believers, and somehow or other miraculously, spontaneously, people, despite of all this propaganda, despite of all this brainwashing, and it was heavy propaganda. It started in it would start in the kindergarten, then in the school, practically all the time we were told, no God, no God, no God. Man is coming from the monkeys. That was the official concept, you know. You are nothing but monkey without a tail. So that's the only difference. Besides that, there's not much difference, you know. If you put a tail, you will be like monkey. So, and then in the colleges and universities, it was even more heavy, because those people who were in the universities, they were supposed to be leaders of the country, so they were making sure that there is no theistic ideas in the minds of people. Despite of all these endeavors, despite of all this saying, you know, still people would believe, still people would go to church, but it was strictly imposed by the government that no young people were allowed into the church. You know, the old people, okay, but young people were not allowed. When I was in the university, it was around the time when Prabhupada came to Russia, for you to have a taste of what Russia was like. You know, there was, in my batch, in the university, Moscow State University, there were around 250 young men and women. So among these 250, one dared to admit openly that he believes in God. Within 2 months, he was expelled from the university. He was kicked out from the university mercilessly. Just his only crime was that he said, you know, maybe he is there. Maybe God is there. So that was the country where Srila Prabhupada came in 1971. You know, nobody was supposed to believe in God. Bible was completely prohibited. You would not be able to buy Bible or to get Bible or whatever. It was unheard of. And Prabhupada, he always wanted to come to Russia. His very strong desire was to come to Russia, because he came to many countries, but he didn't come to Russia. And at that time, you know, was the actually pinnacle of the Cold War. Brezhnev was there, was the ruler. He was a good friend of Indira Gandhi. Indira Gandhi would come and they would embrace each other and kiss each other. But you know, no religion whatsoever was allowed at that time. As you probably heard, there was an iron curtain. The country was behind the iron curtain. It means that practically nobody would be able to leave the country and go to the West, and very few people were allowed to go into the country, only for guided tours or for some diplomatic purposes or whatever. Some purposes were there, but it was very, very much restricted. The traveling from Russia abroad and from abroad to Russia was very, very much difficult. Very difficult. You know, sometimes people would have to wait the permission to leave the country for 3, 4, 5 years, just to leave the country for a few days. Because the fear of the authorities, Russian authorities at that time, was that if people go, you know, the propaganda was Russia is the best country. But at the same time, there was hardly any food stuff there. nothing was there, but still it was the best country. So to keep this concept or illusion in the minds of people, they would not allow people to go abroad, because, if they would go abroad, they would see that there are some, at least, food stuff in other countries. How is it the best country? So the official doctrine was, this is the best country, everything else is just rotten and goes to hell. We are only going to heaven. The heaven will be here very soon. Without God, of course, with Lenin as our appointed God on earth. So therefore they had to do it, and to impose this strict discipline. Now, there were advantages of this. People were humble, people were, people were not so much into consumerism. Actually, there was very good things there in the Soviet Union. Sometimes I regret that it's not there, of course, without all these restrictions. But people were really nice, and actually people were spiritually thirsty. This whole gigantic experiment which was done by the Russian authorities, by the communists, actually is the best proof that religion is a very intricate part of human nature. Because for 75, or I don't know, probably 75, 74 years, there was no religion allowed. There was no notion of religion. There was such a heavy propaganda. But as soon, the moment when everything became open, everyone became religious again. Didn't work. They were stretching the rubber, and then they let it on, and the rubber went back to the natural stage. This is actually a very good proof that religion is natural. People are believers. Whether you don't believe or believe, you believe. You may think you are atheist, but deep inside your heart, you're a believer. I was, brainwashed since my kindergarten. Still I was praying. I didn't know to whom I was praying, who is this, but still I was praying. When it was tough time, I was praying, please help me. Who is there to help me? I didn't know. But the nature is there. This is the nature of the soul. And the soul is a part and parcel of Krishna. The soul cannot be happy without God. Therefore, in any shape or form, religion must be there. And even in atheistic Russia, they made a pseudo-religion to fill the vacuum. Because absolutely without religion, people feel empty. There is emptiness in the heart, which they can only, eradicate by drinking vodka. That's the only way. You don't know vodka, so it's whiskey. Shut up. So that's the way to fill the vacuum, the emptiness in the heart. And Prabhupada, he wanted very much. He had this idea, and many times he tried to get visa, but as I said, it was difficult to get, even as a tourist. But of course, Prabhupada didn't want to come as a tourist. He didn't want to come for sightseeing. He didn't want just to entertain himself in Russia. He didn't have any of such business in his mind. He wanted to preach. And he tried to get visa, but unsuccessfully. I don't really know, because tourist visa for foreigners was available. I don't know about Indians, but for Western people, it was possible. But Prabhupada, of course, didn't want to come with the just casual visit. He wanted to preach, and therefore, somehow or other, he got in touch with this Professor Kotovsky. About whom you probably heard. And Professor Kotovsky is a very interesting figure. He's the grandson of one of the fathers of Soviet Union, of founding fathers of the Soviet Union. His grandfather was a great military hero during revolution time. There are still monuments in him. So this Professor Kotovsky probably was the worst person to speak about religion in the whole of Soviet Union, besides Brezhnev himself. So, but somehow or other, by Krishna's arrangement, to emphasize Prabhupada's glory, how Prabhupada could use even Professor Kotovsky in the service of Krishna. Krishna arranged his contact with Professor Kotovsky and started some letter exchange. Prabhupada wrote something to Professor Kotovsky. Professor Kotovsky was an Indologist. He was quite famous scholar, a specialist in Indology in India. And Prabhupada wrote him something about some subject matter. I don't know what. Prabhupada initiated this exchange. And Professor Kotovsky very politely wrote him back. And Prabhupada wrote again, and Professor Kotovsky wrote him back. And in the second or third letter, Professor Kotovsky casually mentioned to Prabhupada, in case you happen to visit Moscow, please come. I would be happy to see you and converse with you, speak with you. Prabhupada took this letter and said, I am invited to Moscow. He was not really invited to Moscow. In case you happen to be there, it's not very, open invitation. If you happen to be there, please come. So Professor Kotovsky wanted to be polite, but Srila Prabhupada used any opportunity. He said, you should just sneak there anytime. So, sometime before, somebody said to Prabhupada, there is a chance to go to Moscow, and it was winter time. And winter time in Moscow is very severe, right? It can be minus 10 easily, minus 20, minus 30. I mean, it's freezing cold. Madhumati Pushkarini, Nirmal Krishna were there, and they said that in Russia there are only two seasons. It's white winter and green winter. From the Indian standards, there are two winters there. It's like in Bangalore also, there are two seasons, rainy season and something else. So, and some, the first chance for Prabhupada to go to Russia was in winter. And somebody said, Prabhupada, there is a chance to go to Russia. And there was, at the same time, simultaneously, there was another invitation for Prabhupada to Hawaii during mango season. And Prabhupada immediately said, I'm going to Moscow. And, devotees started saying, Prabhupada, don't go to Moscow, it's too cold and it's too miserable and it's communism. Go to Hawaii. Prabhupada said, preaching in Moscow is sweeter than any mango in Hawaii. That was Prabhupada's taste for preaching. He was living. He was, his preaching was his life. He was getting, blessings of Krishna by preaching, and he knew that this is his mission. So he wanted to come to Moscow for preaching, and he had some hope that Professor Kotovsky will arrange some programs with students. He knew that it was hopeless to speak with Professor Kotovsky, but he had some hope that something will be arranged for him to speak with the students. He came and he visited Professor Kotovsky. Professor Kotovsky was formal, polite but formal. And of course he said, there is no question of any student program for you. Prabhupada had some conversation which was secretly recorded by Syamasundara Prabhu. Syamasundara Prabhu had a recorder with him, and he secretly recorded this conversation. And when Professor Kotovsky found out about it, he was furious. But of course, this was too late. It was already printed in Science of Self-Realization. And back to God hidden everywhere. So And this way, Professor Kotovsky became very famous. Because that was the last thing which he wanted, because it was dangerous for him. What I want to say is that if you practiced religion at that time in the labor camps, in the prisons, prisons were full of religious people. If somebody would become a sincere believer, it was a very good chance that he would be put in prison. Especially for preaching. There was a special article in the criminal code of the Soviet Union specifically for such cases. Basically, this article was saying if you preach religion, you would be put in prison, but it was camouflaged. It was kind of, literally it was said that if you propagate some views which are harmful for Soviet people and for their health, then there was you will be detained for up to 5 or 6 years, I think, in prison. So if people would start preaching, then, actively, they would be put in prison on the basis of this article, because it would be very easily, the case would be made that this is some harmful propaganda which is not very good. So, and of course, devotees in the West, they knew that Russia is a very atheistic country, and therefore Syamasundara Prabhu, who arranged the visa for Srila Prabhupada in Bombay and who accompanied him, there were only 2 people together with Prabhupada, Syamasundara Prabhu and Aravinda, his servant. So Syamasundara Prabhu, he was very strict, and when he was putting his things in a suitcase, he made sure that there was no religious picture, there was no religious books, there was nothing there. And his young, naive, and very dedicated and devotional wife, Malati, she thought, my husband is in Maya. And she secretly put big Bhagavad Gita into his suitcase. She saw that the husband is in Maya and he forgot to take Bhagavad Gita. How you can go somewhere without Bhagavad Gita? You have to have Bhagavad Gita. So it was a big surprise for Syamasundara Prabhu, because on the border, the customs would very thoroughly search through all the things and belongings. And if there was something religious, it would be confiscated immediately, and you could be put in prison also for this crime of trying to sneak in the country something which is forbidden. So Syamasundara Prabhu, he almost had a shock. He almost fainted when the custom officer opened his suitcase, and the first thing which he saw was Bhagavad Gita. He didn't know that Bhagavad Gita was there. He started shaking in his shoes. He didn't know what to expect. So this is actually Krishna's arrangement. This is how Malati was instrumental to bring first Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita, into Russia. So, but she very lovingly put there a few pictures of their young daughter Saraswati, and there were photos and pictures were there in the Bhagavad Gita. So this custom officer, he opened this book, and he wanted to see what is this book, what is it about, and of course he didn't know English, so it was not so easy for him, but still, the pictures were there. But when he took the book and opened it, all the pictures of Saraswati fell down, and he felt a little uneasy, and he felt a little ashamed, and he started apologizing, and he said, oh, this is your little daughter, please forgive me. He put all the pictures inside the book, closed the book, and said, go. This is how the first Bhagavad Gita went in Russia. And Prabhupada didn't have Bhagavad Gita. Prabhupada very innocently went there. So, He was old man, of course. So, yeah, Prabhupada met with Professor Kotovsky. Prabhupada was not very impressed by Professor Kotovsky. And I believe Professor Kotovsky was not very impressed by Srila Prabhupada. You know? They were completely opposite people. But what happened later, you know, Prabhupada was trying to preach to him Krishna consciousness, to preach to him this concept of Krishna, Bhagavad Gita, or whatever. Professor Kotovsky said, no. This is not for me, this is not for my people, this is not for my country. This country, you know, people in this country don't believe in God. We will never accept all these religious ideas. And, that was it. So many years later, in 1990s, in the beginning of 90s, when we had the first temple in Moscow, Professor Kotovsky came to our temple. He was invited. We invited him because we knew that he met with Prabhupada, and we happily welcomed him. We put some garland on him, and we, arranged some nice prasadam for him. And he was sitting, and he couldn't believe his eyes. Everywhere there was people in dhotis with tilakas, and at that time it was a peak of book distribution. Everyone was busy running here and there, and there were, the whole temple was swarming. There were hundreds of devotees there. And at one point, Professor Kotovsky started crying. He really started crying, he said. He couldn't believe his eyes. He said, when I spoke with Swamiji, I never thought that his mission will be successful in my country. But I was mistaken. So this is Prabhupada's vision. Prabhupada, he knew that there is something special going on to be there. Therefore, he wanted so much to come to the Soviet Union, and he finally came. And from external point of view, his visit was not very successful. He spoke with Professor Kotovsky. He went for sightseeing because there was nothing to do, he could sit in his hotel room and chant, or, ultimately they went for sightseeing. And Prabhupada, they went to some little hill which looks over Moscow city. This is the place where Moscow University is there. And, I was not there at that time, but it was just a couple of years. If I was there, just a couple of years before, I couldn't theoretically meet with Prabhupada. So Prabhupada, it was June of 71, 21st of June or something like this. 22nd of June, I believe. Yeah, 22nd. It's actually also very interesting. It's a very interesting coincidence, if there is coincidence in this universe. But 22nd of June, this is the date which is known to, at least it used to be known to every Russian citizen, because the 22nd of June was the day when Nazis Germany attacked Russia. When the Second World War started before, but Russia was involved. The Germans entered Russian or encroached Russian borders on 22nd of June. And it so happened that Prabhupada also came on 22nd of June. I remember Srila Radhanath Maharaj was giving a lecture, and he said, Napoleon wanted to take over Russia, he failed. Hitler wanted to take over Russia, he failed. Srila Prabhupada came to Russia and he conquered Russia. So he came on the exact same date. Of course, it was not pre-planned, but still, it's a peculiar detail of the whole thing. Srila Krishna wanted to show how to, if you want to conquer something, you have to conquer their hearts. And Prabhupada, he came not with this military campaign, but he came to conquer over the hearts of people by love. by Krishna's love. He was the messenger of love, and he came, and he was actually successful. So when he was in this guided tour, and he was looking in the Moscow city from the top of the hill, and Syamasundara Prabhu, he said, at that time he said, there will be time when there will be tens of thousands of people together chanting the holy name. That was the prediction in 1971, which was absolutely unbelievable at that time. In 1992, there was a big concert arranged by devotees with, forget his name, Boy George. With Boy George. Boy George was a part of this concert. He was somewhat close to the devotees. And there were 30,000 people attending this concert and chanting together, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare. So it was only, 21 years later, when Prabhupada's prediction was fulfilled. He said specifically. And also at that time, during this visit in Moscow, Prabhupada said, he saw that, the whole country was actually under the fear. There was a lot of military, policemen were there. Prabhupada liked Moscow in one sense because he said it's a very clean city. And Moscow was really clean at that time. It's not like this now. It's still quite clean, but not that much. But at that time, it was really clean. And Prabhupada liked it very much. Every morning in Moscow, there were special machines with water and some, special equipment to clean all the streets. It was really clean city with a lot of, greenery and everything. But still, there was a lot of military around in the city. And Prabhupada said, you cannot really keep people under the fear all the time. He said, in 20 years, this country will be finished. That was Prabhupada's prediction. In 1991, according to Prabhupada's prediction, the country was finished. So, that's the power. Satya Sankalpa, whatever pure devotee wants, Krishna fulfills. And you perhaps read about this, Syamasundara Prabhu was standing in a queue in a shop to buy some rice or whatever, some foodstuff, whatever little was available at that time. And there was somebody standing behind him. And this somebody who was standing behind him started whispering in his ear, do you know something about yoga? You want to tell me something about yoga? Syamasundara Prabhu became ecstatic. He thought, oh, this is Krishna's God-sent, opportunity. I will go to Srila Prabhupada. And he took everything, he took the number, and he said, yes. Definitely. My teacher is there. He is a great yoga teacher. He will explain everything to you. And he came to Prabhupada back to hotel and said, Prabhupada, somebody wants to know about yoga. Prabhupada said, this is secret police, don't go to him. If you go to him, you will be arrested. Prabhupada saw through immediately. But then there was another occasion when Syamasundara Prabhu again, he was walking in the street of Moscow, and he was walking in a dhoti, which was unheard of. Especially a white-skinned person in a very exotic dress. At that time in Russia, there was very valuable because there was very little things, especially Western things, were not available. So there were something which was very valuable, and there were a category of people, a class of people who would earn their living by meeting with the foreigners and asking foreigners or buying from the foreigners some valuable goods from the West and then reselling them, 2-3 times more expensive to Russian people. So there was a category of people who would make living like this. They would hunt, they would know English. At that time, hardly anyone knew English. These people would know little English at least. And they would ask, do you have Beatles, how you call this? Records, yeah. Do you have Beatles records? Beatles records were really, if you had original Beatles records, you could make fortune for this record. Or blue jeans. Blue jeans was also a very valuable commodity, So Syamasundara Prabhu was walking on the street in one of the central streets near Kremlin, and one young man approached him. And this young man was together with an Indian, and this young man asked him, do you have blue jeans? He said, no, I don't. I have my dhoti, I don't have blue jeans. Do you have Beatles records? He said, no, I don't have Beatles records. But I have my guru. Oh, you have guru? That's interesting. So, at least something, No Beatles records, no blue jeans, but at least guru is there. So maybe there is something. So this is how Prabhupada met with Ananta Shanti. Ananta Shanti initially wanted, something which he thought was valuable, and he got something much more valuable. Syamasundara Prabhu brought this young man, and together with Indian to Srila Prabhupada, and this young man very, inquisitively listened to Srila Prabhupada. He happened to know English, which was really rare. Again, to meet somebody on the street there who was not a KGB agent, who knew English, and who had an interest, who knew quite nice English because he could understand and relate to everything to Srila Prabhupada. It was practically impossible. Practically impossible. But Krishna made this arrangement, and Prabhupada Syamasundara Prabhu said that he never heard Prabhupada speaking so strongly as he was speaking to this young Russian person. He said, I heard Prabhupada in many, many occasions, in many temples, he was speaking always, but that was probably the best of Prabhupada, because Prabhupada wanted to put all his heart into this young person's heart. Everything which was there, which he knew, which he wanted to give, with such a conviction and such strong desire. So, and therefore this young man, he was like a sponge. He was absorbing everything in a very amazing way. And later Prabhupada said that, the cook, when he wants to know whether the rice is ready or not, the pot of rice is ready, he takes 1 grain of rice and he sees if 1 grain of rice is ready, then the whole pot is ready. And he said, I see by this man that this whole country is ready to take Krishna consciousness. That was Prabhupada's judgment. He saw the reaction of this one man, and he was right, because, as I said, when Russia became open, then very quickly people who were thirsty for some spiritual things, they started taking Krishna consciousness, Christianity, so many other things. And at that time, there was Hare Krishna explosion, as Suvarna Gaur Hari said. But that was later. That was in 1990s when the country opened. End of 80s, 1990s. But before that, before the country was open, there was another chapter of Krishna consciousness movement in Russia, very sad chapter. This young person, Anatoliy, his name, Anatoliy Pinyaev was his name, he became Ananta Shanti. Prabhupada gave him initiation by mail. And he became in regular contact with devotees. Prabhupada, at that time, what Prabhupada did, he told all his leaders to go to India via Russia, via Moscow. You could make a stop in Moscow airport, or sometimes, spend a day or two in Moscow. So the devotees would secretly, frequently visit Moscow after Prabhupada's visit. And they were, maintaining contacts with Ananta Shanti. Ananta Shanti was meeting with them secretly. And of course, very soon it was known to the secret police, to KGB at that time. And he was watched. But nevertheless, he would get some, tulsi beads or whatever, and he started preaching. And the next very significant step was in 77, or even 76, no, I think 77 was the first time, when Gopal Krisna Maharaj for the first time came to Moscow with Bhaktivedanta for the Moscow book fair. Every year there was a big international book fair in Moscow, and different publishing houses would come to Moscow and had their stalls there and give their exhibition, and people would visit them and sometimes converse with them. So Gopal Krishna Maharaj in 77, when Prabhupada was still there, in May of 77, for the first time he came to Moscow with Bhaktivedanta Book Trust and with the books of Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, and they had a big stall, and it was very successful. There were hundreds of people coming because the books were so special. They were so bright and a lot of pictures and everything, and the people. But unfortunately, people didn't have money to buy. And Gopal Krishna Maharaj was kind of puzzled whether he should give books or he should get money or whatever. He got some rubles, but rubles were useless. You couldn't really change rubles for dollars or for any currency. It's also like Prabhupada. We always say that Prabhupada came to America with, 40 rupees or what? $7 or something like this. But, the 40 rupees was not $7. 40 rupees was $0 because you couldn't exchange this 40 rupees for dollars. You couldn't use this 40 rupees. Somebody still has this 40 rupees which Prabhupada brought with him to America. So anyway, what happened actually, this book fair, the roommate of mine, he visited this book fair and he got a book and he got acquainted with the devotees, and this is how I became a devotee ultimately. So this is how it happened. I was staying in Moscow State University at that time, and he first became a devotee, he first became vegetarian and started chanting, and then somehow or other he involved me, and here I am 40 years later talking about this. So, but what happened, because of the books, because of preaching of Ananta Shanti, because of all these people who were devotees who were coming, and actually Prabhupada also, what he did, he sent Mandakini Devi, his disciple from France, to Russia, and he said to Mandakini Devi, you go to Moscow and you marry Ananta Shanti. Because if you had a foreign wife, that was the only way to get out of the country. And Prabhupada, he at least had a plan, or he saw that it's dangerous. But, Ananta Shanti himself, he asked Prabhupada, is it possible for me to get a foreign wife? And Prabhupada said, no problem, we have many girls. But this is amazing, this Mandakini Devi, she's coming now regularly to Russia and preaching all over Russia. And she's really an amazing person. And, without even thinking twice, she went to, Prabhupada said, you go to Moscow and marry somebody from Russia, and she went to Moscow and married somebody from Russia. Of course, it didn't really work, but nevertheless, it's a very, good illustration of how first disciples of Srila Prabhupada were completely 100% sold out to him, completely dedicated. They were ready to do anything and everything for him. That's this devotion to Guru, which is glorified in Shvetashvatara Upanishad. Because of this, the devotees started coming new devotees. It was very easily, actually. It was really easy to make devotees at that time in Russia. It was not difficult at all. People were thirsty for something spiritual. If you would tell them something, they would be very, easily involved. Especially kirtans. Russian devotees, they still love kirtans. Niranjan Maharaj, when he first came to Russia, and it was not only Niranjan Maharaj's experience. Indradyumna Maharaj was also one of the first preachers. Gopal Krisna Maharaj, of course, was probably after Srila Prabhupada. Oh, of course, Hamsadutta went there. So many leaders went there. Gopal Krisna Maharaj was one of the first ones. But they all had experience, when the first programs, when Russia became little open, there was still programs in the apartments. And, there was little apartment, maybe one-room apartment. Just one room, not even one bedroom, one-room apartment. There were 50, 60 people jammed into this one room. And they would sit for 3, 4, 5 hours completely jammed, listening for the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. Every preacher who was there at that time, he still remembers that it was just something unbelievable. Here, if, in any temple, when you come, please finish your class at 9 o'clock sharp, not 1 minute more. Especially in the West, it's very strictly imposed. In Russia, they would speak 2-3 hours. People were completely in a very stuffy room where there was no air to breathe. They were still sitting and listening because they wanted to know. They wanted to know what is it all about, this life and God and everything else. So what I mean to say, even before it was open, Krishna consciousness started spreading like wildfire. I remember those days, you would speak a little bit with somebody and somebody would become really inspired. Really? God is there. Tell me something more. How can I know? What shall I do? It was really interesting. And I was doing at that time, I graduated from Moscow State University. I was doing my postgraduate studies. I was doing my PhD degree. And, at that time I started chanting. The KGB, which is secret police, the intelligence, not intelligence, secret police, the police, started really worried about this strange, exotic movement, which is, spreading like wildfire. Later I think it was in mid-80s, when Russia was still quite closed. In the mid of 80s, there was an article published in one of the central magazines in Russia. And this article was written by the head of the KGB at that time. And he was analyzing the political situation in Russia. And he said there are 3 main threats coming to Russia for our system, for our country, for our communism. 3 main threats coming from the West. One is rock music. I don't remember what was the second one, but the third one was Hare Krishna. So it was the threat for the whole system. So the reaction was, of course, very vehement, because they were really worried about this. They didn't know what to do, how to deal with it. The only way they knew how to deal with it is just to put everyone in prison and to stop it, and somehow or other to just really stop it. So in 77 there was this book fair which actually gave very strong push to the development of Hare Krishna movement in Russia. And we know that in 77 Prabhupada passed away from this world. Few times, I think 3 times, Gopal Krisna Maharaj would come with the book fair before the police found out what is it all about and stopped this whole thing. But it was too late, because there were so many books already there, Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, from this Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, because Bhaktivedanta Book Trust was an official, member of this whole book fair. And so many devotees were there. And in 78, in 77 it happened, in 78, in Moscow, in the headquarters of KGB, of the secret police, they formed a special department to fight with Hare Krishnas. Special secret police department to, to stop this Hare Krishna movement. And in 79 already, in 79, no, it was in 80, sometime in 80 or maybe 81. Anyway, they started some court cases against the devotees. They put first 2 devotees, then more devotees, and ultimately in different parts of Russia. And at that time, but unfortunately for them, at that time already Krishna consciousness was practically everywhere all over Soviet Union. It just spread like coronavirus. Because people were so eager to get something spiritual. And, so many people started chanting Hare Krishna. They were having this kirtans and everything. So, from 81, I think, or 80, they started putting devotees in prison. And altogether they put to prisons and labor camps more than 60 devotees, around 60 devotees, which was probably, I don't know how many, it was probably good percentage of the serious devotee population. Practically all, they were initiated by that time, of course, by Harikesh Maharaj, Prabhupada's successor at that time for Russia. He was the zonal acharya for Russia, and he actually did a lot. He and North European BBT, they were spending a lot of money. North European BBT was under him, so they were spending for this Russian program a lot of money to actually maintain this program and this preaching. They were helping a lot. All these devotees, and Kirtiraj Prabhu, Prabhupada's disciple, he was in charge of this program. He was a glorious fighter. I will tell something about him a little later. Of course, there is no time, but I can go a little more. It was very difficult time, and I still remember this time because I started, I started chanting around that time, around 1980, when I started chanting. And I remember whenever I would meet with a devotee, it was, we always were half Krishna consciousness, Krishna conscious, another half KGB conscious. There was this split personality syndrome. We were trying to think about Krishna, but we were also thinking about KGB because they were watching us, and we talk half of the time we talk about Krishna, and half of the time we talked about KGB, what KGB did, because they were, encroaching people's homes, confiscating all the literatures. Every now and then doing some search, and sometimes detained people for 2-3 days, and they were putting people, as I said, started court cases. There was a wave of court cases, and it was Russian prisons are probably, I don't know, I've never been to Indian prisons, but I think they are at least as bad as Indian prisons, if not worse. And it was really difficult. Some devotees were put in psychiatric hospitals, and we put heavy psychotropic drugs, and including Ananta Shanti. Ananta Shanti was put and detained in psychiatric hospitals for a few years, and because of the so-called treatment, it affected him severely, unfortunately. But there were people who even died in labor camp. And the most glorious one was Shachi Sutta. You read his story in Salted Bread book. He was a book distributor from Armenia, and he was very young. He was 21 at that time. He was put in prison in a labor camp, and if you're put in prison in a labor camp, you cannot say, I'm a vegetarian, please give me vegetarian diet. Forget it. So he could only eat some bread with salt. There was nothing else. For a couple of years, he was only eating this bread, and sometimes he would even share this bread with somebody else because people were starving. And at the end, he died out of malnutrition and starvation in the labor camp. It was also very cold at that time, and when you don't eat, you're very sensitive to cold. So what he did, the people who were there with him, they were really amazed by watching him. This is the miracle which Prabhupada created. How he could, they have never met with Prabhupada. They have never met with, they met with, maybe with Ananta Shanti, or maybe not even with Ananta Shanti, because Ananta Shanti was also put in prison. They met with some maybe young devotees from there. They maybe read some of Prabhupada's books at that time in Russian. But the faith was so strong. He would not eat anything which would even touch meat there, even though he was starving. He was completely, his body was deteriorating, and ultimately he said to his, cellmate, not even cellmate, because it was a labor camp. They had to heavy work during the day without practically any nourishment. So he said, I will die. I'll probably die. And what he did, he wanted to die as a devotee. And of course, there was no tilak at that time. So what he did, he took a toothpaste and he put tilak with the toothpaste on his body, in the 12 parts of his body. And he put some, bed sheet, new bed sheet or whatever, over his, as a devotee and something. And in this way, he died. Because he wanted to maintain his identity as a devotee. And he was ready to die, but not to deviate from the faith. It's very difficult for us even to imagine. Here everything is free, and if you want to practice, you practice, but nobody wants to practice. But there, people were, they were under a huge threat, and they were practicing, and They were dying for the faith. So he was the one. Another one was Premavati. She was put in prison. She was a girl, or a young woman at that time. And, a baby girl was born to her. I think it was in prison or maybe the baby girl was just born and still she was put in prison. And this baby girl, after 2 months, died in prison. And at that time, the Russian program headed by Kirtiraj Prabhu and Harikesh Maharaj at that time, they started a very strong campaign all over the world to make it known. Kirtiraj Prabhu did everything possible and impossible he met with the heads of states, with the presidents, with Queen of England, and to everyone he was telling, look what is going on in the Soviet Union. Innocent people who are vegetarians, who are not harming other people, who are, just believing in God, they put in prison and they're dying there. He started a huge campaign, free Soviet Hare Krisnas. There were demonstrations. Devotees would go out in front of the embassies in all the capitals of the world on appointed days, and they would demonstrate free Soviet Hare Krishna, free Soviet Hare Krishna in front of Soviet embassies. It was a big campaign, amazing campaign. You missed it, but at that time it was the talk of the whole ISKCON. And Prahlad, the famous Kirtaniya singer, at that time he was young. He was maybe 9 or 10 years old, and he recorded. There was a recording of song. I don't know, was it him or somebody else wrote the poetry, and he sang a song, Mr. Gorbachev, free my friends, free my friends. Mr. Gorbachev, free Hare Krishnas. And there was a Hare Krishna there. And in Australia, they did it, and there was a big press conference, and it was really a big event at that time. And then they, somehow or other, they went to the Prime Minister of Australia. And Prime Minister of Australia, and they gave him this record, where a little boy is in a very, angelic voice, is singing this song, Mr. Gorbachev, please free my friends. And they say that this Prime Minister of Australia, he started crying when he heard this song. And he personally called Gorbachev, and he started pleading to him, please, please, please do something about this. And that was the first one. And then Ronald Reagan, he spoke with Gorbachev. And of course, at that time, it was already Gorbachev, and the country would become a little more free. And this is how this whole chapter more or less ended. But nevertheless, it was a very tragic and difficult chapter. Difficult time when devotees were suffering. But at the same time, nobody even thought of giving up Hare Krishna. And everyone still would preach. Despite of all this stress, despite of all these dangers, devotees would continue preaching, as if nothing would happen. And the more pressure was there coming from the government, the more devotees would preach. And the movement was still spreading. And actually, some say that, like when Kamsa was oppressing Yadavas before the advent of Lord Krishna, then Narada Muni went to him and said, do it more. Why did Narada Muni said this to him? Because he wanted to finish the guy quicker. He knew that the more atrocities he would do, the quicker he will be ended, he will be finished. So this is what happened actually with the Soviet Union. There is definitely Hare Krisnas contributed to the fall of the Soviet Union in an indirect way, because these people were so foolishly persecuting the innocent devotees. My friend, who was also put in prison, the friend who made me a devotee, he's living in America now. He told me a very funny story. When he was, when the case against him started, and the court case against him started, the secret police, they arranged for some fake or false witness. They spoke with one lady and they probably bribed her, gave her some money and said, you please come to the court case and you say that, these people, they were preaching to your daughter and your daughter became crazy or something like this. They were trying to make a case against him, against my friend and a few other devotees who were living together with him. So this lady came to the court as a witness. She was invited by the officials, and they said, we have a very strong witness against these people. And she started, making a story. Yeah, these people came and they were preaching. And actually, she made up the whole story. She said, they were telling me that you should, sacrifice your daughter. We will make a sacrifice of your daughter, or something like this. She was making a heavy story. And devotees were sitting there, listening to this, and they were thinking, what is happening? And it's a heavy situation because it's such a heavy accusations. So, and they were preaching about God, and she was saying, and the lawyer, which was there with devotee, she was a very smart lady. She stood up and she said, Your Majesty, can I ask this witness a question? So she said, yes, please ask the question. So, and she asked very innocently, which God did they speak about? And because at that time nobody knew about Krishna, they only knew that there is only one God, Jesus Christ. She said, Jesus Christ, of course. And the whole thing failed. They arranged, but they didn't arrange properly. They didn't inform her about which God they should speak. So this is just some little taste, but it didn't really, of course, didn't hinder them. They still put my friend in prison, despite of all these false things. So yeah, and then Gorbachev came in power, and he started freeing the country little bit. Perestroika was there, and few devotees were released. But most of the devotees, they stayed in prison 3-4 years, and it was very difficult, really difficult. Some of them told me after that we didn't know how, whether we will survive or not. Every day we were counting, and it was luckily just practically only Sachisuta and this little girl, and somebody else in psychiatric hospital also was died. He died. When the country was free, then the new chapter started, and in the beginning of 90s there was a huge explosion. As I said, there was this Boy George concert where 30,000 people were chanting together in Moscow. And there was a huge book distribution. I mean, amazing book distribution. The country was so poor at that time. People were poor, and there was no cash. So people would not get salaries. They couldn't get salaries because there was no cash. There was huge economical crisis. So the devotees, book distributors, Sankirtan devotees, they would come to a factory, huge factory, with a couple of thousand people working in the factory. And all these people, they don't get salary. So they would go to the bookkeeping office of this factory. And he said, they would say, we have these books, you don't have to pay us cash. You can, transfer money on our bank account. We can take this money from you. Why don't you give to all your workers these books, the set of books to all your workers? And sometimes they would distribute, within a couple of hours, 2,000 or 1,000 sets of Prabhupada's books. Wholesale. Because, people, they couldn't get money, at least they could get Prabhupada's books. That was a good deal. They would not get anything, but at least they could get something. And really, at that time, it was easy. The book distribution was so easy at that time. I remember I was in Marathon, and the people would come. I would stand with some little table with the books, and somebody would come, and I would start preaching to him. And this person, oftentimes they would say, "Shut up, I know." You don't have to tell me. I want to take these books anyway. So this is how it happened. Then there was so many other things, but I guess for the beginning it's enough. Maybe some later we will tell something. Okay? Because I'm already talking long ago. Okay?
You can hear more.
It's already quite late. What happened after that? It's interesting. The whole the historical lessons are very interesting. This initial enthusiasm was there, and there was a lot of devotees. There was a lot of explosion, and in Moscow and St. Petersburg, the temples were opened and everything. But then it's not that easy. Some internal problems came, and devotees started losing enthusiasm also. It's still a material world. It's Russia, but it's still a material world. So far to the moment, I think it was at least 25, if not more, million books were distributed in the whole of Russia. So it means that every 10th person has a book, or 10% of the population, or maybe even more. So it's probably in every other family there is a book of Prabhupada. And there was actually a radio station. And in the beginning of 1990s, there was a special Hare Krishna radio station, Krishna Loka. There was the radio Krishna Loka, and it was one of the most popular radio stations in Moscow. Around 1 million people would listen the programs of the station every day. 1 million people. It was a really good radio station. Unfortunately, we couldn't maintain it because it was a very expensive affair. So we couldn't continue with this program, but it lasted for how many years? For 5 years. Yeah. 5 or 4 years there was this radio station, very popular. Yeah, but then there was crisis in Moscow. It was a very difficult time. And Harikesh Maharaj, he changed something in his mind, and it was very difficult also. But many devotees, and I was thinking about it, why did it happen? When Prabhupada came, of course, everything was so glorious, and his vision and his prophecies, they were fulfilled and everything. But then, why this crisis all of a sudden? There was thousands of devotees at that time in Moscow, and all of a sudden, this happened, and there were just a few devotees, not a few, but probably half of the devotees left. In 1998, it was a very severe crisis, and I was thinking why it is. And then I came to a very important conclusion that even though there were so many people attracted to Krishna consciousness movement, when the movement became so big and so influential in one sort of way, there was a lot of social pressure. When the movement becomes big, there is some social pressure. And there were a lot of people who were kind of devotees externally, but they were not really devotional internally. And this is what may happen also in India, when the movement grows and grows and grows and grows, at one point, it kind of, it's like fashionable to become a devotee. Everyone around me a devotee, why not to become a devotee? It's a good group, it's a good social gathering, arrangement. I could even physically feel that because of so many people who were not really, who were losing their internal connection with Krishna, but still maintaining their external appearance as a devotee, the whole atmosphere became spoiled, and it was difficult. So Krishna did a brilliant arrangement. He just by one stroke, he said, "You're free. Please turn on your brain. Turn on your intelligence. You turned off your intelligence. You are a devotee not because you really believe it within your heart, but because everyone else is there and because you're just blindly following." What happens, and that's a big danger, when the movement or spiritual organization becomes, popular or big, then there is a lot of blind followers. And these blind followers, it's a big burden. It's a big burden for Krishna too. So Krishna said, no more blind followers. I don't want blind followers. You please, blind followers, either become, again, see again and decide or go away and do something else. I don't need blind followers. So that's also a very significant part of the whole history of Russian preaching called Srila Prabhupada's mission. And, since that time, of course, many years passed, and the movement spread even more. It became stronger after that. And so many Russian people are joining Krishna consciousness ISKCON all over the world. Actually, in America, in England, in Europe, everywhere, even in Japan, Russian people joining ISKCON. It's less, in German ISKCON, there is less native Germans than living in Germany Russians. It's mostly Russians and Indians, and few Germans are there. Even in Japan, there is a lot, in Japan there is not so many Russians living, but somehow or other, even in Japan, they managed to join this code. It's the vision of Prabhupada. He knew that somehow or other this Krishna consciousness movement, by some arrangement, it's very conducive, or it's very coherent, harmonious with the Russian psyche or Russian understanding. So people are joining still. We have now big preachers who have also millions of followers, and so many people join. But that's entirely different story. So let's keep this katha as it is now. That's enough. So that was little historical explanation of what happened in Russia. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai! Gaura Premanandi.
Thank you very much, Maharaj. Jai! So it was a long desire to hear this whole story. We just heard that Prabhupada went and then preaching happened, but the details many of us did not know. Thank you very much, Maharaj, for enlightening us on this topic. Somehow in India, Krishna consciousness is so easily available. You go walk a few meters, you get a Krishna temple, here Krishna temple, Shiva temple, holy rivers, holy places, holy sages, but still we don't take it very seriously.
There were few medical students and medical workers who were working in Russia. Nirmal Krishna is one of them. Madhumati Pashkarini was also there. And there were quite a few medical students from India who became devotees in Russia. And one of them said, I became a devotee in Russia. I went back to India, and he says, there is no Krishna consciousness in India. Only in Russia there is Krishna. So that was his understanding. I don't know. I don't agree with this, but I'm quoting him.
Yes, so much opportunities there, but we don't take it.
Yeah, sometimes we become complacent. You become complacent because it's so easily available.
So casually keep seeing Krishna photos, Krishna, hearing Krishna's names. So still we take it as a ritual.
Yeah, actually, one very important lesson is that we should not be complacent. We should not be. We should really appreciate what we have, the gift of Krishna consciousness. It's a rare gift, and people who are deprived of this gift, they appreciate it very much. So please also try to appreciate the opportunities which you have. Deities, temples, devotees association, everything is prasadam, everything is freely available. You're very lucky.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai.